Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Global China in a Religious World, Part 2, the second session. I want to introduce myself. My name is Emily Hertzman, and I am a research fellow here at the Asia Research Institute. And I want to welcome you to this conference. I'm an anthropologist, and I do research about Chinese religion and identity in West Kalimantan. And I've been working with David Palmer on his project, BRINFAITH, Infrastructures of Faith Along the Belt Road Initiative. And I'll be happy to present a small piece of research related to more closely to infrastructures in our session tomorrow. So I want to describe for you a little bit about this conference, its uniqueness, and give you a sense of what to expect over the coming 2 days, and in fact, 4 days. So as David Palmer's BRINFAITH project, this conference is looking at new kinds of perspectives on different kinds of transformations that are taking place in the context of China's global rise. So looking really beyond geopolitics alone, beyond economic flows, beyond financial flows. So in this conference, we're really interested in presenting cases from around the world and that investigate these other kinds of flows taking place alongside China's outward expansion, which we all know includes large infrastructure projects along the newly imagined Belt and Road and Maritime Silk Road. So these flows include ideas, ideologies, imaginaries, and particularly new religious forms of identification, as well as techniques and strategies and material cultural forms. So this conference is actually really unique, and it's not just unique because it's so theoretically innovative, but also because of the way that it's structured. So our conference is taking place, for those of you who have not joined the first component, for those of you who are just joining for the first time today, we have 3 parts in 3 places using 2 formats. So we just wrapped up last week 2 days face-to-face conference in Hong Kong, where a group of scholars came together. And now we have got 2 days of online panels of the conference. And later in October, we will have 2 more days hosted by the Center for Global China in Shanghai. So we're covering a lot of ground. There's over 50 or nearly 50 papers in the conference. And because of that, we can be extremely thematically and geographically diverse and represent a lot of places and a lot of processes. But it's not just that. There's something about the spreading of this conference over this time period that allows us to stop and think and reflect and digest between each session. And so I think that that's really interesting. And I think that it means that it's kind of cumulative, and the conversations and discussions can grow in this, we can find connections in this really interesting way. So I just want to recap a little bit from the last 2 days that we had in Hong Kong. It was very intense. It was very lively. We covered a lot of ground. It was very stimulating. We had a lot of fun. And I think it was really important, as David Palmer had mentioned at the end of those 2 days, to actually bring scholars to the University of Hong Kong and to engage in this kind of academic work at a time when academic freedom can feel like it's being seriously challenged. So a number of themes and connections were generated, and I won't have time to mention them all right now, but I would like to run down a couple of them. So during those 2 days, we talked about the role of Chinese actors in spreading Christianity in parts of Africa. We talked about China and the Islamist imaginary, and these are all points that that David Palmer and Tenzin Sen had summarized for us at the end of that conference. We talked about assemblages of multiple actors that spread Chinese cultural influences. We talked about ideologies and practices at national levels, which mediate Chinese and various religious and national identities. And we talked about the perception of China through infrastructure. And Orlando Woods from Singapore Management University also stepped in with some very astute comments and observations about that really sort of summarized some of the discussions we're having, particularly in terms of this global, this intersection of global China, global Islam, and global capitalism. And so we talked about religious identities as opportunities and barriers to belonging and different forms of cosmopolitanism. And finally, although it's actually not finally, it's just my final point, we asked about what may be exceptional about Chinese infrastructures. So for the next 2 days, we will have 6 panels, mostly arranged geographically, as we had done in the first 2 days. And we expect to continue these really fascinating and often very unusual discussions about these kind of complex assemblages in this whole world of what we're calling global China in a religious world. So before I talk about the format of the individual panels, and before we kick off our first panel, I would like to hand it over to David Palmer to speak a little bit more about the BRINFAITH project in general.
Okay, hello, can you hear me? All right, so welcome everybody to this second session of the conference, Global China in a Religious World. I'm David Palmer from the University of Hong Kong. And as Emily has just said, today we're starting the second session, the second 2-day session, the second of 3 2-day sessions of a conference which is turning out to have been, to have drawn a lot of attention and attracted a lot of paper submissions. This is the closing conference of this grant of the Hong Kong Research Grants Council for a collaborative research project, which is called Infrastructures of Faith, Religious Mobilities on the Belt and Road. This is a project that the idea of which occurred around 2017, and then the grant to create an international collaborative team was awarded in 2018. The project began in 2019 with a team of collaborators from different disciplines and universities in Hong Kong, as well as other universities in Asia, Europe, and beyond, looking at different cases of the intersections and entanglements between global China, the expansion or the increasing engagement of China in different parts of the world with religious communities, religious networks, religious strategies, religious imaginaries in different countries, ranging from Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, the Maldives, Sri Lanka, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and so on. The team had done, after 1 year of field research, which for most people is 1 summer of field research, the pandemic kind of closed off the remaining years of our project. Fortunately, the members were able to continue their research and writing. We had several online workshops and also several online lectures. And so I'd like to just encourage you all to check out the website of our project. Let me see, I will share the screen so you can have a look. All right, can you see, right, can you see the website? Right, so you can find all kinds of information on the project, including some of the summaries of the various public lectures on various historical and contemporary aspects of religious entanglements between China and the rest of the world, various cases, the different events, the team, and so on. For most of the project, we had been meeting online, and we have a special issue of Modern Asian Studies, which is now in the process of completion. And in the last year of the project, the pandemic ended, and we finally were able to organize an in-person conference. And so we launched a call for papers, in which our goal was to expand and to invite others who have been working on related topics to present some papers. And this is a new area, and we were delightfully surprised that there was a lot of interest. We received 100 proposals, and so many of them were so interesting that we decided that we wouldn't just have a single online in-person conference in Hong Kong. And we would also give the opportunity for some who are unable to come and travel. And so we could expand the number of papers and expand the participation by also holding some online sessions. And we were delighted that the National University of Singapore Asia Research Institute and also the NYU Shanghai Center for Global Asia have joined hands with us to host these online sessions. So in the as Emily said, we already discussed many different topics in the in-person conference that was held here in Hong Kong a few days ago. We had presentations of that dealt with cases in Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, Iran, Turkey, Dubai, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, Philippines, and other, I believe, other countries as well. Topics ranged from different, I won't even get into all of them, but we touched on the spread of Christianity, Chinese roles in the spread of Christianity in Africa, the influence of Chinese religion spreading through Chinese film in Indonesia, Salafi Chinese Muslims in Malaysia, Iguan Dao, the spread of Iguan Dao alongside the promotion of Chinese culture in Cambodia, the conversions of Chinese to Islam in Dubai, different perspectives of Iranian, how the Iranian government reconciles its Islamist ideology with its growing relationships and friendship with atheist China, how Islamist radical and more moderate political tendencies in Islam in both Turkey and Indonesia, how they perceive what kinds of narratives and discourses they have on China. So we have covered many, many different topics. These 2 days, having read the papers, I think what's interesting as a theme that might be emerging is the role of unofficial circulations of religious individuals and networks across borders in trade relationships, through diasporic relationships, or through reviving narratives of historical networks and relationships. So I see a lot of papers in these 2 days, which are going to be on, a lot of them touch on Buddhism, on Islam, and on Chinese religion in general. and it seems a lot of them are go beyond the official narratives or go under the radar of all the official policies and narratives to look at the circulations and relationships between individuals across borders and from one country to another. So, and in the following session, which will be held in October, hosted by NYU Shanghai, we will have several papers that deal with South Asia, Sri Lanka and Pakistan, India, the Himalayas, more papers on the Islamic world, and other papers dealing with even Christianity in Eastern Europe and its relationship with China, and other aspects. So welcome to follow these sessions in these 2 days, and again in a little later. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the presentations that we'll be having in these 2 days. Thank you all. Thank you, Emily and Michelle and Ken Dean, for the support of Ari here for this session, and thank you to all the presenters.
Thank you so much, David. So we're gonna go right into our first panel, and before we do so, I'm just gonna tell you the format. So each presenter has 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of commentary by a discussant. And then we have a 30 minutes for a group discussion. What I'd like to ask everybody to do is, as questions come to you, please type them into the chat box. And later in the Q&A, we can spotlight you, and you can either turn on your video and restate your question, or you can ask it directly as well, or just be there present for the person. I'm going to be keeping time, so I might interrupt the presenter if they start to run over a little bit, but right now we're pretty much on time. So without further ado, I want to introduce Beiyin Deng for the first presentation. Over to you.
Sorry, I will have to work a little bit on the technology. Can everyone see the slides and hear me clearly? Okay, great. So hello, everyone. My name is Beiyin Deng, and I'm a doctoral candidate in religious studies at Arizona State University. It's my great honor to present my research here, and I would like to thank the conveners as well as Luna and Valerie for coordinating this event. My presentation today investigates the significance of Buddhist ethics in facilitating trans-ethnic, transcultural collaborations in the contemporary trade of marble Buddhist images across the Myanmar-China border. It actually develops from two intriguing questions that I had during my fieldwork in Ruili or Shuili in Burmese in 2019 and 2022. Firstly, almost all of the Burmese artisans that I conversed with explicitly praised Auntie Yang as the best workshop owner and expressed their wish to work for her. What makes Auntie Yang an ideal patron, especially when anti-Chinese sentiments have been intensive in Myanmar? Secondly, Auntie Yang does not offer the best wages for Burmese artisans. Why did her Burmese employees choose to stay with her even when there were better opportunities for them during the past 3 years, when the military coup in Myanmar and the pandemic-induced border closure between China and Myanmar had caused severe economic adversities on both sides? In this presentation, I'm going to draw on my field research in Zhen and Mandalay, Myanmar in 2018 and 2019, and my experience in Ruili, China in 2019 and 2022 to answer these questions. So first, please let me briefly introduce this trade network. Since the early 1990s, this trade network has connected Zhen and Mandalay, the two traditional marble Buddhist image carving centers in Myanmar, with Buddhist temples, monasteries, and lay associations and families across China through Ruili, the famous border crossing city in Yunnan. predicated on the pervasive practice of image veneration in both countries and the expanding trans-regional market forces. Tons of marble and thousands of marble Buddhist images of different sizes are transported across the border every year. Moreover, this trade network has facilitated mobilities of not only materials and images, but also people, with Chinese workshop owners traveling to marble quarries in Zhen and Burmese artisans migrating to Ruili to produce Buddhist icons for Chinese Buddhist clients since the late 2000s. Here are some pictures of the workshops and the marble Buddhist image carving quarter in Ruili. Chinese workshop owners believe that the key to their survival in this trade, especially under stressful times like the past 3 years, is their capability to produce high-quality marble Buddhist icons to satisfy the demand of Chinese Buddhist clients. They often use the term magnificent or Zhuangyan in Chinese to describe such marble Buddhist icons. Zhuangyan, an important concept in Chinese Pure Land Buddhism, is now frequently invoked in colloquial Chinese to convey the power of sacred objects, architecture, and charismatic figures to provoke awe, bliss, or other affective responses among Buddhist followers. In the narrative of Chinese workshop owners, magnificence is not merely a subjective experience, but an essential attribute of Buddhist icons that predominantly derives from the purity, refined texture, and translucency of white marble and the glossy and lustrous appearance of marble Buddhist icons, which are believed to mediate the luminosity of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. These visual qualities are usually summarized by Chinese workshop owners as quote-unquote jadeness, or 玉质 in Chinese, as white marble has long been vernacularly categorized as white jade or 白玉 in Chinese. They also underscored the significance of carving and polishing, sometimes gold lining as well, in producing a magnificent marble Buddhist statues. However, Chinese workshop owners emphasize that magnificence is never guaranteed and can easily be compromised due to the poor quality of marble, inadequate carving and polishing skills, and insufficient time and care during image production. A stable supply of supreme marble boulders and high-quality carving and polishing labor is crucial, while the opacity of the material and the frictions with their Burmese partners always haunt their way to magnificence. On the one hand, many of them mention the difficulties in accurately assessing the quality of marble stones and the scams they encounter when dealing with local Burmese at the beginning of their career. Moreover, the knowledge of the geological layers and the veins of marble in Mount Zhen and the relationship between surface and interior substance of marble boulders is not easily accessible if they do not stay in the village long enough to know the material. What further complicates the problem is the robust domestic market of marble Buddhist images in Myanmar, which has made the material procuring process extremely competitive. Marble quarry owners may easily change their mind and sell the stones pre-ordered by Chinese workshop owners to local partners or Buddhist clients in Myanmar. On the other hand, Chinese workshop owners often complain about their quote-unquote untrustworthy and quote-unquote inefficient Burmese employees, which may not capture the actual scenario, but reflects their persistent concern about the technical virtuosity and reliability of Burmese artisans. The search for good artisans is always ongoing, while maintaining a stable relationship with existing staff to avoid high employee turnover and talent loss is always a headache in this transported economy, because Burmese artisans as migrant laborers are subject to the restrictive border control in Ruili, China. In a nutshell, magnificence is not just essential, but also a social attribute of marble Buddhist icons. Its achievement is intimately connected to the cultivation of trans-ethnic, trans-cultural mutual trust between Chinese workshop owners and their Burmese partners, who are almost entirely ethnic Burman, and the parameters of whose practices are heavily influenced by Buddhist ethics. As the case of Auntie Yang will show, Buddhist ethics is an essential force that shapes people's expectations as well as their interpretations of and responses to Chinese economic ventures at the local level in Myanmar. So, Auntie Yang is a Yunnanese Han-Chinese lady who has been in this transnational economy for nearly 3 decades. Her experience in this trade is categorized by her immersion into the local village life in Zhen. Before the military coup and the pandemic, she usually spent half a year to 9 months in Zhen every year to live with the locals and concentrate on selecting materials, supervising carving, and arranging for transporter deliveries. Moreover, her consistent participation in communal Zhuangyan or Sasana works in Zhen further distinguishes her from other Chinese workshop owners. One of the most important events that established her as a respected patron was a village-wide Dharma preaching ceremony that she sponsored as the primary donor. Since Buddhists in Myanmar believe that bonds generated through collective good deeds at present will be carried forward into their next life, Auntie Yang's dana have profoundly deepened the affective attachment between her and the villagers in Zhen. Additionally, Auntie Yang has also donated the water supply system and the renovation of the main gate at the village temple, and she frequently sponsored other Buddhist events upon the requests from villagers. Because of the willingness and capacity to perform dana signifies one's innate goodness and their trustworthiness, Auntie Yang's donations enhance her social reputation as a reliable Buddhist patron. Buddhist artisans usually use the phrase "gong yu de" to describe their affiliation with her as one that they are proud of, and they consider Auntie Yang's generosity the premise of her success in this trade. So overall, by cultivating her knowledge of local culture and generously distributing Buddhist dana, Auntie Yang manages to meet the local expectations that are informed by a Buddhist culture of giving and converts her short-term expenses on religious events into her social prestige. In turn, her reputation bestows her stable access to premium materials and reliable artisans, which benefits her long-term pursuit of magnificent Buddhist icons. Moreover, the long stretch of this trade network determines that the practice of generosity cannot be limited to the village Zhen, but should be extended to workshops in Ruili, where the status of Burmese artisans as migrant workers put them into a really precarious situation dictated by the strict border control in China. The persisting economic adversities in Myanmar and their own insecurities in China are intimately intertwined, pushing them to seek a reliable patron that can alleviate their subsistence risks. In practice, they regard generosity and loving kindness as 2 essential criteria to evaluate Chinese workshop owners. And Auntie Yang is always valorized as the unparalleled ideal. So she adopts a monthly wage system, and she's really relatively flexible about sick leaves because of a trust in the self-discipline of her employees. Artisans can also advance money from her for urgent needs. Besides monthly wages, free in-store accommodation and utilities, Auntie Yang always provides fruits, snacks, and pastry for their afternoon tea breaks, a practice that actually initially began at Auntie Yang's workshop, but by now has become the norm in the Marble Buddhist carving quarter. Auntie Yang's concern about the health of her employees were also mediated through her in-time supply of medication. Burmese artisans in her workshop often described their working experience as living a peaceful life, or AACC Nelo Yade in Burmese, a status that other artisans constantly envy. The monthly wage system means a stable source of income so that the patience, dedications, and care that are required to produce magnificent marble Buddhist icons are guaranteed. The afternoon tea break was admired as a considerate move which alleviates the physical pain that artisans suffer. Moreover, artisans working for Auntie Yang often appreciated that she has been treating them like family members and proudly emphasized that they had not observed such intimacy at other workshops. An example that they constantly brought up was the family banquets on the Chinese New Year's Eve or other festivals in which Auntie Yang's best friends and her Burmese employees were equally invited to sit together at the table and enjoy drinks and dishes cooked by Auntie Yang and Uncle Yang. This move epitomized Auntie Yang's extension of loving kindness beyond her family and friends towards her employees. So Auntie Yang's generosity and loving kindness has contributed to a strong patron-client relationship that was crucial to the survival of her workshop during the pandemic. Even though there were better opportunities with higher pays at other places, Burmese artisans expressed they could not bear to leave because they were grateful to Auntie Yang and empathized with her difficulties. To terminate their relationship at this moment was an immoral move. And although the relationship between Auntie Yang and her employees seemed really exploitive, her employees' responses to my confusion and their constant praise of her comprehensive care illuminate a moral economy that they are willing to subjugate themselves to as migrant laborers in Ruili, one that does not prioritize the maximization of economic gains, but emphasizes the minimization of insecurity and subsistence risks for Burmese artisans. So I'm going to wrap up here with some concluding remarks. So in the end, the on-ground interactions this trade have facilitated during the past 3 decades remain quite distinct from the exchanges of monastic delegations between China and Southeast Asia sponsored by the nation states, which exemplify the use of Buddhism in diplomacy. While recent scholars have focused on protests from local religious communities against Chinese infrastructure projects across Southeast Asia, Auntie Yang's experience as a form of popular wisdom in the transnational popular realm has not only demonstrated the crucial role of Buddhist ethics in shaping the expectations of Burmese Buddhist communities in the face of Chinese economic expansion, but also illuminated the importance of fostering interdependent reciprocity informed by the Buddhist culture of giving in China-Myanmar encounters. So this is the end of my presentation. And thank you very much. I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful and perfectly on time. I would like to invite our next speaker, Zhen Ma.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends where you are now. I'm Zhen working. Can you hear me well? Sorry? Okay, good. I'm Zhen working at the School of Aesthetic and Cultural Studies in Dali University in Southwest China, Yunnan province. The title of my presentation today is Trans-regionalisation, cross-border monks and local devotees, the revival of Theravada Buddhism in China's Southwest Borderland. So as you can see that the theme of my research is actually on the revival of Theravada Buddhism in China, but because the theme of the conference today is global China in a religious world. So I will focus more on the trans-regional or the transnational collections between Southwest China to the Upper Mekong region. Did I play? Yes. So my presentation covers mainly 4 aspects of my research. The introduction part will give you a brief idea of the geopolitical importance of Xishuangbanna and the social political background of its Buddhist revival. The second part explains how did the trans-regionality take place between Xishuangbanna and the Upper Mekong from the late 1950s to the early 2010s. So next, I will present several very either regionally or internationally influential monks who all share a cross-border life and their role in the rebuilding of the Buddhist tradition in Xishuangbanna. The last part shows the role of the local people's role in the rebuilding of their Buddhism. But because of the theme of this conference, I will not go into details of this part. So before presenting my study, let me explain what Buddhist revival refers to in my research. Scholars relate Buddhist revivalism in the Chinese context to two movements. First, the Buddhist modernization process, which occurred between the mid-19th and the mid-20th centuries. And the second, the rebuilding of Buddhist traditions and the normalization of Buddhist activities after the Cultural Revolution. So the Buddhist revivalism analyzed in my research, especially in this presentation, specifically refers to the second movement. Central to understand the rejuvenation of Theravada Buddhism in Xishuangbanna is its region's geopolitical situation. It is the southwestern borderland of China, where the nation's physical border doesn't always overlap with local people's self-identified spiritual or ethnic boundaries. Both the Dai and the Bulang people living at this margin of China are transnational ethnic groups whose Buddhist tradition finds its root in the mainland Southeast Asia. This region straddles four national borders of modern states, as you can see on the map on this slide. It covers four modern nation states, namely China, Myanmar, North, and Thailand, which have long been culturally interlinked by networks of kinship, trade, language, tribute, and faith. So my study situates the Buddhist revival of Xishuangbanna in the context of religious revitalization in China and its connection with the Upper Mekong. Although the politics and institutions of the Chinese state framed Theravada Buddhism's revival, it was not entirely determined by political developments in China. It heavily relied on the Buddhist collections between Xishuangbanna and the Upper Mekong, particularly through the trans-regional networks of the Yuan or the Yun Buddhist temples and monks. So substantial support arrived in the form of many cross-border monks who have instrumental in the re-establishing the Theravada Buddhist tradition in Xishuangbanna since the 1980s. In tandem with the Buddhist revival in Xishuangbanna, a sense of trans-regional belonging was re-established among the people throughout the borderland. However, this sense of trans-regional belonging shouldn't be taken as given because it was reforged by the cross-border movements of people, both lay people and monks, in specific historical and political moments. From the late 1950s to the late 1970s, many people, especially monks, landloaders, village headmen, fled from Xishuangbanna aimed waves of political movements in China. And this map on the slide shows the two roads people normally take when they immigrate from Xishuangbanna to other places. So they normally get out from China, from Mengna, and then to Canton, and then to Tajilik, and then another one is from Bulang Mountain to Menghua, and then Mengyong, and then to Tajilik, and then they would continue to northern Thailand. So Canton, Mengyong, and Tajilik, and some villages in northern Thailand are the main places this, especially Bulang and Dai people settled eventually. Among the people who fled, the most influential one was the Kuba Sina, then called Rubi Sina. He was the abbot of a temple, a village temple in Xishuangbanna in the town of Menhun. He went to kingdom in 1958 with many Xishuangbanna Dai and the people, and then he moved to Tazilik 9 years later and started to build Vasemon there. So the photo on the right side of the slide is the pagoda of the photo of the temple when I visited there in 2020. This temple became actually one of the most important Buddhist center for both Dai and Bulan people living on both sides of Xishuangbanna in the since the 1980s to now. So subsequently, from the early 1980s to the early 2010s, many of those who fled, or those or whose parents had fled, returned to Xishuangbanna, and those who choose to stay in their refuge homes also recollected and maintained communication with their families in Xishuangbanna. So cross-border recollection was reconstructed between people inside and outside Xishuangbanna in the juxtaposition of religious worship and non-religious activities such as family reunion and comments. Many people undertook great effort to maintain dual identities and dual families on both sides of the borders. As you can see on the slide, those are the Burmese ID card or the Thai ID card of some of the Xishuangbanna Dai people obtained to visit their families. The experience of constant border crossing created a sense of trans-regional belonging among the Dai and the Bulan people. This sense of trans-regionalism and the Buddhist revival in Xishuangbanna are closely linked. The cross-border religiosity that was practiced between Xishuangbanna and Upper Mekong is deeply embedded in the Yuan or the Buddhist tradition. Many high-ranking Thai and Shan monks played very important roles in helping Xishuangbanna with its Buddhist revival. So in this photo is the very famous, well-known, the well-known Kuba Bengcheng and Kuba Sina I mentioned minutes ago. While the visit and the support from these very famous Kubas were crucial in the revival of Buddhism in Xishuangbanna, there are many less internationally recognized monks whose more pragmatic approach was nonetheless also vital in this process. And the most Xishuangbanna locally known is the Kuba Wenli. So he was born in Shan state, but his mother is a Xishuangbanna Dai. He obtained his Buddhist education in northern Thailand, and in 1989 he walked all the way from northern Thailand to Xishuangbanna and helped building lots of pagodas and temples in Xishuangbanna. So those are the photos of, so the very left one is the very first meditation center he built in Pamelong in Xishuangbanna. And the second is one of the pagodas, Junxi, he built, helped build in Xishuangbanna. And the very left photo is how the local people remember him by hanging his photos in their village temples. Although monks were very important in rebuilding the Buddhist tradition, it doesn't mean that local people, especially Dai and Bulan, didn't play a role in that process. Because distinct from most Theravada Buddhist societies, where monks play the main role in religious affairs, in Yunnan Southwest, Dehong and Xishuangbanna prefectures, lay people play the central role because of the lack of monks. The most important three are the Bojangs and Kanlangs and Saints, because I have a whole section in my paper to deal with this topic, but I will not go into detail with this because they are not very transnational or global. So let me wrap it up very quickly. So my argument is that Xishuangbanna's Theravada Buddhist revival was facilitated by the prefecture's religious collections with the Upper Mekong region. The constant border crossing has maintained and accelerated the religious communications among Xishuangbanna, Shan state, and northern Thailand. Buddhism in Xishuangbanna, but now Buddhism in Xishuangbanna waitlist is experiencing some kind of uncertainties because this customary border crossing, which were turned a blind eye to by the Chinese government, has been changing because of the tightening border control and increasing religious regulations. So it is very ironic that the Buddhist revival enjoyed the Buddhist in Xishuangbanna enjoyed a very energetic revival because Xishuangbanna's geopolitical situation as a borderland, but now precisely because Xishuangbanna's geopolitical situation as a borderland, its Buddhist tradition is increasingly facing challenges, and the culture and the political dimension of these new changes are yet to be explored. I will end my presentation here, and thank you very much for your time. Any comments and feedback would be very useful for me to develop this research further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to remind everybody to start typing your questions into the chat. And now we are going to hear from our discussant. Can I please welcome Qian Junxi?
Thank you, Emily. Thank you very much. And also my gratitude goes to David, who invited to serve as a discussant for this session. And I have a lot of resonance with the two presentations that have been given, because both of them echoes some of my past research in Chinese, in the Yunnan, Southeast Asia borderlands, and a particular piece of my research actually related very closely to the mobility of religiosity and monks. So I'm going to start from the paper on the transnational trade of Buddhist icons. In fact, I don't think I have a lot to comment on these two papers, because I find them extremely coherent. I find them extremely informative, and they provide very compelling narratives. And probably because the conference asks presenters to provide full papers, I find that the presentations are extremely mature, well-developed, and coherent, as opposed to many other conferences in which you have you bring very rough ideas to a presentation. And so in this scenario, I find that the narratives are really well developed and compelling. So I'm just going to comment a little bit on some of the theoretical ideas that I have been wrapping up with during the presentations. So with regard to the paper on transnational trade of Buddhist icons, in fact, I think, because I'm not an anthropologist or sociologist, I work in the discipline of urban studies and human geography, and I find that a lot of resonance between the current paper and a highly established debate in economic geography about the importance of engaging with heterodox economics. So this is as a very highly established. So inspired primarily by influential figures such as Karl Polanyi. So heterodox economics has very long argued that economy is not simply about the pursuit of instrumental rationality. It has always been about the embeddedness into complicated networks of social relations and social qualities. So economy is always socialized and contingent on local social and cultural networks and fabrics. So actually, this paper has spoken very beautifully to this theoretical point that economic geographers, economic sociologists have been debating for many years. So I find a lot of exciting and compelling materials in that paper about how the realization of profit and economic value is contingent on the ways in which we advance alternative value regimes, cultural values, social values, spiritual values. And there are very complicated and intricate relationships of mutual translation between these different regimes of value, right? And we cannot deny that for Auntie Yang, her ultimate purpose is to make profit, is to get rich. And we cannot deny the fact that there might be exploitative relationships between Auntie Yang and the people that she employs. But these controversies, these frictions are negotiated or dealt with or resolved by turning to alternative value regimes, such as those in the domains of the social and the cultural and the spiritual. So this is a fascinating story, and I am really inspired by this presentation. So this is so this relates to the similarity between this paper and the general debate on heterodox economics. But the particularity of this paper is that it discusses with a very peculiar and very special form of economics, which is religious economics. Religion is very different from other more general forms of economies, because religion, after all, is about the outwardly pursuit of redemption, of spiritual sublimation, etc., etc. It is considered, so religion is if there is some, so there are many things that we believe to be ontologically separate from economy, but religion is probably a more extreme case. So how can we insert an economic dimension into something that by default we take for granted as non-economic, non-instrumental? I think this is a theoretical question that can be explored in more depths. Of course, in general, we believe that all kinds of economies are embedded in social and cultural relations. But in terms of a religious economy, given that religion has long been considered to be opposite to this worldly pursuit, to instrumental rationality, I think the particular ontology of religion can help us to dig into this question even deeper, in a deeper way than Karl Polanyi once suggested. Okay, so this is the my thought about the first paper, and I find it really, really interesting, really, really compelling, and also some brings a lot of inspirations to me to think about how ethnic and cross-border cultural relationships are forged in a context of political controversy and political animosity. As you mentioned at the beginning of the paper, it is actually very, very strange to see a Chinese treat woman so well received in a Burmese context. And I really enjoyed this research. And in terms of the second paper, and also I have so much resonance with that paper because a few years ago I did field work in the really Myanmar border, and I investigated the transnational mobility of monks as well. So, so in that particular in the research that I did, I find that a very interesting interplay between the stabilization of national boundaries and national identity, as you have highlighted in your paper as well. But in the same time, we have also witnessed the reaffirmation and the reconsolidation of national difference and national identity. Because many Buddhist monks from Myanmar traveling to Rili, they say that they have chosen to do so not only because they feel a moral obligation to contribute to Buddhist revival in Rili, but also because Rili can provide them with better living conditions compared to Myanmar, right? Because of the economic development in China, so they can be very well supplied and supported in Rili. So in Myanmar, monks keeps the tradition of venturing into the street and asking for alms from ordinary people, right? So, but then but they told me that in Rili they don't need to do so because the food, and other conditions and infrastructure of everyday life will be supplied to them. They don't really need to go to the street and asking for people's donations. And they find that this is going to give them more flexibility in their everyday life and more time to devote to the study of Buddhist teachings, because they don't need to worry about where is my next meal. So so this is the kind of dialectic, the kind of interplay that I have observed in my particular research. And in dialogue with your research, I have three thoughts for conversation with your paper. So the first is of course, I think I have a sense that your paper has focused primarily on this destabilization of national boundaries, the formation of a cross-border network of cultural, ethnic, and religious affinity. However, I would be very much interested in seeing a dialectical relationship, a relationship between the destabilization and in the meantime, the reaffirmation, the reconsolidation of national difference or national identity in this scenario. Because as many political scientists, political geographers, political sociologists have told us, transnationality does not lead to the erosion of national differences. Rather, it's negotiation, and in many circumstances, it's reaffirmation. So this is the first serial question that I would like to throw out for dialogue with you. And second, well, the second is not really a question, but more compliment, because I find, in contrast to my research, my research is relatively seen in its ethnographic materials. I find that you have presented very interesting and very compelling biographies of very important Buddhist figures. The oscillation between the two sides of the border, right? So in my own research, I simply took for granted that they travel from Myanmar to China. But in your research, apparently they have very complicated life histories of cross-border mobility. Some of them originated from China, and then they traveled to Myanmar, and then they went back. And some of them might be born in Myanmar, and because of particular reasons, they travel to China. They traveled to China, but they had the education in Thailand. So there are very complicated transnational mobility networks that bring different locations and different social and cultural contexts together. And I think this is a very important strength of your research, because you have presented such rich and interesting biographies of leading Buddhist figures. And another question is, another point is, and it's related to a point that you have raised in your conclusion. So probably in the future we can discuss how the particular changes in the political context will reshape cross-border Buddhist mobilities, especially during the pandemic. What happened during the pandemic, when the borders are closed, when such transnational mobilities were disrupted very abruptly by the imposition of consolidated national boundaries. So these are my premature thoughts about these two very well-developed and very compelling papers. Thank you very much, Emily, and congratulations to the two presenters.
Thank you so much. Those were very thoughtful comments, and I'd like now to give each, I had failed to mention this before, I'd like to give each speaker a time to quickly respond to the comments that were made. As we do so, anyone else who would like to join into the discussion, please type your questions in the chat box. So Beiyin, Deng, would you like to go first?
Sure. I am actually reading the questions in the chat box.
Sure, and you may if you would like to respond briefly to what Junxi just mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for those really friendly and very engaging comments from Junxi. And I really appreciate that he brought up the point about religion or the role of religion as kind of similarly opposite to our consideration of economy. But in fact, well, I think that stereotype, to a certain degree, actually fit with people's perceptions of Buddhism pretty well, because people may assume that while Buddhism promotes detachment to material, those luxury items, material aspects of life, etc., and Buddhism should be ascetic, right? But that's not the case. That's not the reality. And actually, Buddhism, since its inception or during his transmission across Asia, has been deeply entangled with economic networks. And it also has its own economic functions within the communities that it established itself. So I think that's a very fascinating topic that really deserve more investigations. And I really encourage other scholars to get involved in these conversations. In terms of, let me see.
Before you head over to the questions in the chat, I'd like to give Ma Zhen a time to respond.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you very much, Professor Qian, for your wonderful comments. I think So your first, and I will respond very briefly to your first and the third comments, because the second was not really a question. So I think I will skip that one. So the first one on the destabilization and the stabilization of the national border. I think this is a very important topic that I actually didn't really engage in the paper, because I was, especially when I was submitting the paper to journals, the reviews always encouraged me to, you know, to change it to some kind of mobility and destabilization of national borders in that paper. So I think it's a great point. I think in my paper, because this paper I actually didn't plan to write this paper, but I was writing another one. Then I realized that if I don't look at the Buddhist revival between the late 18th to the early 2010s, then I couldn't understand the situation now. So this research is really very historically situated. So during that kind of 13 years, the border was so porous that I remember when I was doing field work between 2012 to 2018, I actually crossed the border many times. Like you just cross the border. Of course, there are lots of national government restrictions and laws implemented in regulating the border crossing. But because there were no kind of physical barriers along the border, so local people just cross the border kind of in their daily life. And also I think because the political environment was very relaxing back then, and most of the local officials are the ethnic group people there, so they actually allowed this kind of border crossing as a kind of customary practice. So they basically allowed it, but it doesn't. I think you're right. It doesn't mean that the border was completely destabilized. And I think this first comment also related to the third one, how the particular change in political changes when the border closed during the pandemic. Actually, in Beiyin's article, she also mentioned that you know, the border was tightly controlled when the Chinese government issued the new regulation on the Buddhist on the religious affairs in 2018. So the border was already kind of slowly closing off, and the COVID-19 pandemic only were kind of highlight of that. So after 2018, because in Xishuangbanna there were many Burmese, especially Burmese monks living there. So after 2018, they couldn't like just you know, randomly cross the border and live in villages in Xishuangbanna. They had to register with very complicated procedures to the local Buddhist affairs, Buddhist association and local government apparatus. So the control is very tight now, and especially the Chinese government have the policy that I don't know how to say it, border residents called the 边民政策. So it means that if you come from a certain place in Shan state or Wa state or Myanmar, you could only stay in certain place like Menghai or Menhuan or Menla, those certain counties or towns in Xishuangbanna. So this pushed many Burmese and Laos monks to obtain sometimes even fake IDs to be able to stay in the villages where they wanted. And also I think one of the restriction now is that the local Dai or Bulang people who, especially boys who are under 19 years old, couldn't couldn't participate Buddhist activities. So especially because in Xishuangbanna, like if you are a novice, you can still go to public schools with robes on, but that is not really allowed now. That I think that is that really has a fundamental influence on the survival and on the survival of the Theravada Buddhist tradition there, because Theravada Buddhist tradition is really like relied on the many how to say the ordination of very many young boys, but that is not the case anymore. And because most of the cross-border monks, especially from Myanmar, they were identified as the three illegals, namely illegal cross the border, illegal stay, illegal work. So they had to apply for a resident permit from the local government, but it is so complicated that many people just couldn't do it. So I think in 2017, I know that there were around like more than 300 Burmese monks working and living in Xishuangbanna, but I think now maybe only less 10 are still remaining there. So this is the results of the new policies and restrictions. But I think the local people, because they still need monks to do all kinds of rituals for them. So I think I'm looking forward to see the relaxation of the policies, and then allow the local people could invite more monks from Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand. But I don't know. I don't know how things will go in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chen. That's fascinating, and I think that the concept of the three illegals and that whole story is another thing that you should definitely track and follow up on. I want to invite Sen to ask his questions, followed by Ngar Si Lao, and then David Palmer.
Yeah, thank you for the fascinating questions, and nice to see you, Emily, again. Just quickly, I see there are a couple of typos in what I typed. So Beiyin, I think your title is quite appropriate, but then in your presentation and your paper, use the term Buddhist ethics, which is much broader than dana and love and kindness, right? And so how appropriate it is to use the term Buddhist ethics when I think only two aspects of it, one very intimately linked with economic activities, dana, and the other, we are not very clear what kind of care and love is being promoted. So could you explain why you are using the word ethics and not just sticking with dana as a highlight, right? And the second one was with regard to the argument that anthropologists have made that objects have agency, and I was wondering how your study can add to that argument. Do these idols that are moving between Myanmar and Royally have some agency? You can say it promotes the idea of dana and so forth, but are they? I mean, or is it mostly an economic activity that is promoted by one lay Buddhist, right? I mean, what's the implication? And for Machen, I think I really liked your papers as well. But I wanted to ask you with regard to revival, what kind of thing is being revived, right? I mean, just coming of Buddhism does not mean revival of something that existed previously. Is it the original Xishuangbanna Buddhism? Is it Thai Buddhism? More broadly, Buddhism? What is the Theravada Buddhism in Xishuangbanna that is being promoted? And secondly, because we are both papers focusing on sub-regional connections rather than larger regional connections, does the state interfere? I think this is something related to what the discussant was pointing out. Do the states interfere in the mobility, not just the pandemic and things? Is mobility constrained by nationhood and the movement of people who have national identities? Thank you.
Beiyin, would you like to actually respond to that?
Sure, I will try my best to answer that question. I think I would like to highlight dana and loving kindness because they are actually the two foundational, two very basic Buddhist ethical principles in Myanmar, basically. I mean, the prominence that Burmese people attribute to this concept of Buddhist dana and loving or metta, loving kindness, is I'm not sure whether I'm correctly or accurately saying this, but this prominence of these two concepts may not be easily observed in other Buddhist societies in East Asia. I mean, they are so predominant and everybody is involved in those dana activities or showing or conveying their loving kindness to each other. I mean, not just to their family members or friends, but also beyond these small circles of connections. But more broadly, I think in Burmese Theravada Buddhism, there are also depictions of the ideal master-servant relationship in Buddhist economic practices, which requires masters and servants to discharge their respective responsibilities in a wholesome manner. So, for example, a noble master should assign his servants and employees work according to their capabilities and dispositions, and supply them with food and wages, tend them in sickness, sharing with them unusual delicacies, and grant them leave at all appropriate times. And in return, servants and employees should accordingly act in sympathy with their masters, for example, by rising before them, lying down to rest after them, being content with what is given by masters, etc., etc. So there's actually a very systematic description about the ideal master-servant or patron-client relationship in business activities as well. And I think these obligations envisioned by this Buddhist economic ethics is still based on the concepts of dana and loving kindness in general. Yeah, I hope that my answer, I answer your question. And in terms of how my research adds to the argument about objects having agency, I think scholars in Buddhist studies tend to see Buddhist images as coherent objects in themselves. And so far, I haven't seen much research on the materials that they are made of and the circulation of these materials across the border, and Buddhism itself as the venue for, or the network itself for the flows of these religious materials. People, when scholars talk about Buddhist images, they tend to begin with consecration ceremonies, and then how these Buddhist objects circulate afterwards, maybe from one place to another and back to its original place, etc. Actually, I think the contribution of my paper and my research in general is its emphasis on the material itself, something that scholars have neglected. I haven't seen any attention paid to, for example, marble as a Buddhist material. People tend to treat it as just a normal mineral, not very valuable, but that's not the case from the perspective of lay Buddhists, or not just lay Buddhists, Buddhists in general, especially in China, when they interpret this material as jade. And scholars tend to approach these semi-jade materials from a naturalist or objectivist perspective. And they say, well, they just call it jade, but it's not. They are faking. They are trying to add value to these materials. But if we approach the material from a Buddhist perspective, you may understand how Buddhists see the Buddha-ness of this material from very specific perspectives. And those perspectives are usually neglected and haven't been investigated in a very thorough way. Yeah, so I think that's part of the contribution that my paper has to the overall argument. Yeah, I hope I answer your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Na Zhen, would you like to respond to Tenzin? Then we'll talk with Nar.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sen. Oh, sorry, maybe I should call you Professor Tenzin for your question. So I first respond to your first question, which is what kind of things were revivaled. And I think in terms of the things are revivaled and in Xishuangbanna was the ordation, like they started to ordain young or not only young boys, but also those who couldn't ordain as a novice or monks during the Cultural Revolution. They started to do the ordation. So then we see lots of novices and monks started to appear in Xishuangbanna in that period. And then I think the second things were revival was the Buddhist manuscript or Buddhist scripts, because during the Cultural Revolution and even the political movements before the Cultural Revolution, many of the Buddhist manuscripts were burned. So so the lay disciples, especially Bojang, Kanan, and those old people, they started to borrow Buddhist script from Shan state and northern Thailand to transcribe them into a new copy. So they started to have Buddhist manuscripts. And then I think the third thing which were re-established is the ritual procedures. So before the cultural, before and during the Cultural Revolution, they couldn't do most of the rituals, so they started to do the rituals. And refer to your second part of this this question, what kind of Buddhism was revived in Xishuangbanna? I think this is a very interesting and complex question. I think it's a combination of the Buddhism in northern Thailand, because I'm very hesitating to see that the Theravada Buddhism was rebuilt in Xishuangbanna as Thai Buddhism, because we know that in Thailand, Buddhism is not only like Thai Buddhism. So the Buddhist tradition in northern Thailand is slightly different from or the general kind of a Thai Buddhism. I think it's kind of combination of Buddhist tradition in northern Thailand, Shan state, and Xishuangbanna, and this region is called by several scholars as the Thai Tam cultural region. So it's basically, if we can give it name, is the Yuan or the Buddhist Yuan or the Yung Buddhist tradition. So they really practice that kind of long period meditation, and they worship Kubas and those very charismatic monks. But I think the Buddhist tradition revived in Xishuangbanna also has its kind of a very local features, like they don't hold the precepts very, very strict, and monks also are kind of only affiliated in village temples, but the village temples are run by a temple committee, which consists, there was three kind of very important lay disciples are mentioned in my presentation. So I think this more or less answered your first question. And the second question, does the state interfere, is mobility constraint? I think we again, as I answered Professor Chia's question, we have to divide this into different periods. In terms of the Buddhist revival period from 1980s to the early 2010s, I think, of course, the state was firmly there. I think we can see any kind of a religious revival in China during that kind of time. The state was firmly there, but I think the state role in the revival Theravada Buddhism in Xishuangbanna is very interesting because we know that a very American anthropologist called Thomas Patron, he wrote a book actually on the Buddhist tradition in Xishuangbanna. He also mentioned that the Buddhist tradition in Xishuangbanna was not really revived as Buddhist per se, but as kind of ethnic minority culture, all the untangible ethnic minority, and this was seen by the Chinese government as promoting the traditional Dai and the Bulang ethnic culture in the very energetic development of tourism development in that region. So Buddhism was supported largely by the government through many different kind of tourist development projects. But it is also very interesting that at the same time, I remember in the 1990s and early 2000s, the government tried to restrain this kind of high rate of boys ordained, because this really infected the public schools, because the public schools couldn't recruit more students, because most of the most of the boys were ordained and they were studying in temples. So the government tried to restrain the ordination. But I think after 2018, things changed. That especially the new religious regulation was after the new religious regulation implemented, mobilities were highly restrained, but not so much during the revival period between 1980s to the 2010s, to the early 2010s. Did I answer your question?
Thank you. You have quite a lot of expertise in this area. Clearly.
Thank you.
I want to just make sure we get a couple other questions in. So can I please turn it over to Ngar Lao? You're still muted.
Okay. Thank two presenters, Beiyin and Zhen. I have a simple question. So I'm curious about for Beiyin, I'm curious about how large is the market of mainland China, or even the overseas Chinese communities about the marble Buddhist statue business over the Myanmar-China border in your study. And follow-up question, if you have time, was there any interference of the business relationship among the Myanmar-China relationships? As I heard in my field work, sometimes my participants, my informants could not get the visa to Myanmar easily when the Myanmar-China relationship was not that good. So I have questions for Zhen, but she did answer my second question. So about the revival of the Theravada Buddhism in Xishuangbanna, as you mentioned, over the period between the 1980s and also about 2018, were there any Han Chinese engagement? I think you may not mention this about that, because over the past decade in my field work, I knew that there was a so-called Theravada Buddhist tradition monastery set up in Xishuangbanna. I visited in 2015. And it grew well. It has grown well until maybe a few years ago, and they mainly attract Han Chinese, because there's a Han Chinese monk. Maybe you know that he went to the Myanmar, the Pao tradition for ordained in the Pao tradition, something like that. So I was curious about that. And for my second question about the existing policy restriction to the revival, I think you did answer my questions about the novice issue. So thank you so much.
Thank you for those questions. We're getting quite short on time. We can go a little bit over. That's okay. So I'm going to ask David Palmer to ask his questions. Then you can each have a chance to respond after that.
Hi, yes. So thanks a lot for both of these incredibly rich and informative papers. I actually, okay, the question, maybe there won't be time, I don't know, but let me just throw in a comment then. There was one thing that I found really interesting, and it's going to, it has some resonances with the paper we're going to hear tomorrow by Wenmei Zhen on the interpreters in Yiwu. So basically, I'm actually speaking more specifically about Deng Beiying's paper, which is looking at the relationships between employers and their staff, and how religious ethics and beliefs and moralities kind of become part of these relationships. And so there's a really interesting kind of echoing to that among the Arab traders in Yiwu and their Hui Muslim Chinese interpreters, and all the dynamics go there. And there's a lot of issues also about kind of religious moralities and ethics and how they shape the business relationships. And this, it actually, Chen Junxi was talking about theories of unorthodox economics, and there's another kind of maybe building on that, or it's actually a different kind of theoretical approach. But I was interested in here actually in both papers, how this would apply to the interplay between religion and infrastructure, where we have real infrastructures that are, well, for example, in the case of these marble Buddhas, there's an economic infrastructure, there's an infrastructure of the production and sale of these Buddha statues that is a cross-border infrastructure. And the paper shows in a lot of detail how this infrastructure actually comes into place through the production, the individuals who are crossing the border, their relationships with their craftsmen. It's all laid out in really precise detail. And it shows also how an economic infrastructure is overlapping with a religious infrastructure, because religion, the temples or Buddhist shrines need Buddha statues, and so that leads to a whole chain of it's a production line, a chain for the production of that. And what's interesting, which is also the case in the Yiwu paper, is it's not only the material religion infrastructure, but there's also moral infrastructures that go into that, and gift economy that goes into that. And so I think there's a really interesting interplay there. And then we can also see, is also the case in Ma Zhen's paper, of here also we have the reconstruction of religious infrastructures, and how there's also the cross-border. Here it's more on the circulation of personnel, but I think both of them have to say something about religious infrastructures and their crossing over with economic infrastructures, and also infrastructures of border control and border management. So I thought that was really interesting. But basically my question was, Rayleigh and Xishuangbanna are interesting comparative cases, because they're both in Yunnan, and they're both Daizhu, primarily Daizhu, ethnic minority districts. But they have their own histories and their own conditions, and they're facing different parts of Myanmar. And so I'm interested in the comparison between the two. And so although your papers are talking about different topics, but I'm sure that, you know, Ma Zhen, when you were listening to Deng Beiying, you were probably like wondering, there might have been, are there any, like, oh yeah, in Xishuangbanna, what about the material religion and any production going back and forth between Xishuangbanna and Myanmar or Thailand in terms of the material the material religion, and likewise for around between Rayleigh and Myanmar, what about the circulations? Is there anything comparable to what Ma Zhen was talking about in terms of Xishuangbanna? And what about Laos?
Okay, briefly, can you each take a minute to respond? 1 minute each.
Okay, thank you, Elsa and Professor Palmer, for those very wonderful questions. I think the scale of the market for this marble Buddha statues in China is quite difficult to estimate. I make this conclusion because of the difficulties that I have encountered during my research to obtain data, whether from the export-import systems across the border, or those data of like the quantity of images that are sold to different temples and monasteries across China. But generally speaking, the Buddhist clientele in general consists of both Han Chinese Buddhists as well as ethnic Buddhists. For example, when you go to Xishuangbanna, you will encounter this marble Buddhist images in those local temples as well. But I would say that actually ethnic Buddhists and Han Chinese Buddhists have different preferences and emphasis when they commission this Buddha statues. Ethnic Buddhists would only commission marble Buddhas in traditional Mandalay style, and they tend not to pay much attention to the jadeness of the material. While for Chinese Buddhist clients, the purity, translucency, and luster of marble Buddhist icons play a very critical role in their decision. And in terms of the overseas Chinese communities, I have published an article on the efforts to convey marble Buddhist images from colonial Burma to China from the 1890s to 1930s, or the late Qing and Republican periods. And you will see a role of overseas Chinese in contributing or donating those Buddha images that were eventually conveyed back to China by those monastics and lay people. And in terms of the contemporary period, I would say that the initiation of, or the revival of these circulation of marble Buddhist image icons cannot be disentangled from the efforts of overseas Chinese communities. And these circulations basically follow two different routes, the sea route and the overland route. But this overland trade is unique because of the establishment of this marble Buddhist carving quarter in Ruili and the migration of Burmese Buddhist craftsmen over there. Yeah, and I hope I answered your question in a really brief way. Sorry about the lack of details, but we can talk about it later. And in terms of the parallels between Xishuangbanna and Ruili, I can observe those parallels. For example, the abbot of the main Buddhist temple, main Theravada Buddhist temple in Ruili, has a long history of mobility across the Myanmar-China border. And I think he was born in Ruili, but then migrated to Myanmar or Shan state for monastic education. And then later he returned to Ruili and take up the position of abbot at that temple. And there are a lot of scholars who have already investigated the flows of lay Buddhists or lay Buddhist ritualists between Ruili and Myanmar. And I think Kojima, a Japanese scholar, has written a lot about these transnational circulations of Buddhists. So I hope I answered your question. Yeah. Thank you.
Zhen, very briefly, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Professor Liu, for your question. I think I will respond to your question on was there any Han Chinese engagement in the revival of the Theravada Buddhism in Xishuangbanna? I think the answer is before 2000, there were, I think, as far as I know, there were not so many Chinese were contributing to the revival of Buddhism. But after, since to the early 2000s, during the development of the ethnic tourism industry, there were many Chinese came to Xishuangbanna, both individually and institutionally. Like those, you know that the biggest Buddhist temple in Xishuangbanna was actually built by a Han tourist company, and I think the meditation center you were mentioning is Patron, right? And it was established by a Han Chinese who was studied in Shan state, also sorry, in Myanmar. But I think the local Dai people, they feel like, you know, this meditation center has very little to do with their Buddhist practice, with their Buddhist ritual, with their Buddhist tradition. So I think it's kind of kind of separate you know, for our people, like outsiders audience, we feel like they're all doing the Theravada Buddhist meditation, but for the local Xishuangbanna, they feel like this meditation has nothing to do with them. And I think also after 2000, some of the wealthy Chinese businessmen, they also donate lots of money to the very influential individual monks in Xishuangbanna. But I think this is not really kind of an institutional or structural thing. It's kind of a personal relations. But I haven't. Maybe it's very interesting to write a paper on this. In terms of, I think I will respond to Professor Palmer's second question. What about noise? So noise is very quiet, and I know that because of the border resident policy that I mentioned in before, that a certain if you come from certain area outside of Xishuangbanna, you could only stay in certain places in Xishuangbanna. So the monks from Laos, they only stay in Mengla County. In Xishuangbanna, and I think the numbers are very high also before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, the numbers are very small because of the restrictions, the borders. In terms of the circulation of the material between across the Xishuangbanna and Myanmar border, not so much of the giant Buddha statues, but the kind of a small materials like the robes, because in Xishuangbanna they hold the annual donating robes to monks. Most of the very high quality robes all came from Shan state and especially Thailand. And many small stuff they used, Xishuangbanna people use on rituals, all imported from Thailand. I think the material flow is very, very big, but not as so how to say a magnificent like the big statues of Buddha that Beiyin is investigating, because the Xishuangbanna Dai, they make their own they make their Buddhist statue by themselves with bricks, wood and mud. Thank you very much for all your questions. I think maybe I will write emails to you later after this conference.
That is a fantastic idea. It would be great if people can keep the conversation and dialogue going outside of the conference format as well. So I'd like to conclude the panel, thank everybody for this lively discussion. And now we actually have quite a long break until our second panel because we had to accommodate so many time zones. So we won't be meeting back until 6 p.m. Singapore time. You'll have to do your own time zone calculation. I just want to reiterate, thank you to everybody who's participated this morning, and see you later.